The dust swirled, a choking, dun-colored shroud clinging to the haggard faces assembled in the makeshift square of Redemption Gulch, a town whose name dripped with an irony so bitter it curdled the spit. On a crude platform of raw-cut timber stood Silas Blackwood, his bulk casting a possessive shadow over the small, trembling figure beside him. She was Navajo, no more than 10 summers, her eyes vast, dark pools reflecting a terror so profound it silenced the coarse jests of the rougher men in the crowd. Her lips were pressed into a bloodless line, a seal against a world that had offered her nothing but brutality. Blackwood's voice, a gravelly rasp that scraped the raw edges of decency, boomed across the tense quiet. "What am I bid for this, stray?" "Found her wanderino after her people forgot her." "Good for chores, I reckon." "Quiet, too." "Never makes a peep." He punctuated this with a harsh tug on the rope loosely tied around her thin wrist, a gesture that made her flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, yet it screamed louder than any sound. The crowd shifted, a few looked away, shame warring with apathy. Sheriff Brody, his face a granite mask of distaste, stood near the edge, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt, a silent testament to the limits of his authority in a place where survival often trumped law. $10 for the girl, a grimy trapper called out, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Blackwood sneered. 10? She's worth more in hide if I skinned her. 20, anyone. A few uneasy murmurs, but no takers. The price of a human soul, bartered like a lame horse. Then, from the back of the small assembly, a voice, quiet yet carrying the weight of stone, cut through the oppressive heat. $1. All heads turned. He stood there, a man carved from the unforgiving land itself, his face weathered like old leather, eyes the color of a winter sky, shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. Josiah. He was a man of few words, fewer companions, his past a locked room no one dared to enter. He drifted into the area a few seasons back, kept to himself on a small, hard-scrabble patch of land miles from town. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, a flicker of outrage, then amusement. $1? Are you mocking me, old man? Josiah's gaze didn't waver. His hand moved, almost too slow to see, towards the worn pouch at his belt. $1 silver. For the girl there was no challenge in his tone, just a flat statement of fact, as if the transaction were already concluded. The air thickened. Blackwood looked from Josiah's impassive face to the girl, whose own eyes, wide and unblinking, were now fixed on this strange, quiet man. Perhaps Blackwood saw something in Josiah's stillness, a hint of a coiled viper, or perhaps he was simply eager to be rid of a burden that had proven less profitable than anticipated. He spat on the ground. $1 it is, then. Sold. To the silent man with the single coin. Don't come crying to me when she runs off or proves useless. Josiah stepped forward, the crowd parting before him like water around a stone. He ignored Blackwood, his eyes solely on the child. He untied the rope from her wrist with slow, deliberate movements, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. The rope fell into the dust. He didn't touch her, didn't speak. He simply turned and began to walk away. After a moment's hesitation, a tiny, ragged shadow, the girl, Ayesha, though he didn't know her name, followed him, a leaf caught in an unexpected current. The townsfolk watched them go, a ripple of unease and whispered speculation following in their wake. Sheriff Brody's eyes lingered on Josiah's retreating back, a thoughtful, troubled expression etching itself deeper into his sun-creased face. The single silver dollar lay heavy in Blackwood's palm, already feeling like a cheat. The journey to Josiah's cabin was a silent pilgrimage through a landscape that mirrored the desolation in the child's eyes. Miles of sun-baked earth, skeletal trees, and distant, indifferent mountains stretched before them. Ayesha trailed a few paces behind Josiah's steady stride, her small bare feet padding softly on the hard-packed trail. Fear was her constant companion, a cold knot in her belly, but as the hours passed, a sliver of bewildered curiosity began to pierce through the terror. This man was not like the others. His silence was different, it wasn't the silence of contempt, but of something deeper, something she couldn't name. He didn't pull her, or shout, or even look back often, yet she felt his awareness of her, a subtle tether in the vast emptiness. When they stopped to rest, he offered her water from his canteen, his movements unhurried, his gaze indirect, allowing her the dignity of her fear. The cabin, when they finally reached it as dusk bled purple and orange across the western sky, was little more than a sturdy box of weathered logs, nestled in a shallow drawer, almost invisible until they were upon it. Smoke curled thinly from a stone chimney, a lonely signal in the wilderness. Inside, it was stark but scrupulously clean. A single room, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth, and a narrow cot in one corner. Another pallet of blankets lay in the other. He gestured towards the cot, then ladled stew from a pot simmering over the low fire into a wooden bowl, placing it on the table with a piece of cornbread. He ate his own portion standing by the hearth, his back mostly to her. Ayesha watched him, her hunger a gnawing ache, but the fear was still too strong. He made no move to force her. When he was done, he took his plate outside, washed it at the water barrel, and then, to her utter surprise, he spread his own blanket roll on the hard-packed earth just outside the cabin door. He was giving her the cabin, the safety of its 4 walls, while he slept under the stars, a guardian at the threshold. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to every experience she had known, that it chipped another small piece from the wall of her terror. Slowly, hesitantly, as the cabin filled with the deep silence of the night, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote, Ayesha crept to the table. The stew was cold now, but she ate, scooping it with her fingers, her eyes darting to the closed door behind which the silent man lay. Days fell into a quiet rhythm. Josiah worked his small plot of land, mended fences, chopped wood, his movements economical and purposeful. He spoke little, usually only a word or two, a soft murmur to his aging mule or a quiet instruction to himself. He never addressed Ayesha directly unless necessary, and then his voice was low, almost gentle. He would leave food for her, fresh water. He carved a small, crude bird from a piece of scrap wood and left it on the table one morning. She found it, her small fingers tracing its rough wings, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. She didn't take it, not at first, but she would look at it when he wasn't near. He noticed she had started to sweep the cabin floor with a worn broom, her movement small and neat. She kept her silence, a profound, unbreakable vow, but her eyes, those dark, expressive pools, began to watch him with less fear and more a searching, questioning intensity. She saw the lines of sorrow etched around his mouth, the way his gaze would sometimes drift to the far horizon, lost in a memory that brought a shadow of pain to his face. She was a witness to his solitude, and he, in turn, was a witness to hers. An unspoken truce settled between them, fragile as a butterfly's wing, yet persistent as the desert wind. One cool evening, as the shadows lengthened and the scent of wood smoke and pine filled the air, Ayesha was exploring the dusty confines of a small, unlocked chest Josiah kept at the foot of his unused cot. He was outside, tending to a loose hinge on the corral. Her fingers, driven by a child's curiosity that was slowly reawakening, brushed against something soft. She pulled it out. It was a doll, crudely stitched from calico scraps, its yarn hair faded, one button eye missing. It was worn, loved, and then, clearly, abandoned by sorrow. She held it to her chest, a strange ache blooming within her. Josiah entered the cabin then, his steps quiet on the packed earth floor. He stopped when he saw her with the doll. The air stilled. Ayesha froze, expecting anger, a harsh word, the confiscation of her discovery. But Josiah's face, when she dared to look up, was transformed. The usual stoic mask had crumbled, revealing a landscape of raw, unguarded grief. His eyes, usually so guarded, were now windows into a well of old pain. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply looked at the doll in her hands, and then at her. His voice, when it finally came, was rough, thick with unshed tears. Her name was Sarah, he said, the words seeming to be dragged from a deep, hidden place. My girl. Ayesha's eyes widened. He walked slowly to the table, sat down heavily, a weariness settling over him that had little to do with physical labor. She loved that doll more than anything. He looked away, out the small, grimy window, as if seeing a scene replaying itself against the darkening sky. We had a small place, further east. My wife, Martha, she made it for her. A pause, heavy and laden. Raiders came. Not Indians. White men, like Blackwood, only worse. They wanted what little we had. His hands clenched on the tabletop, the knuckles white. Martha, they killed her when she tried to stop them from. He couldn't finish the sentence. His breath hitched. They took Sarah. Just took her. I was out hunting. Came back to silence. And blood. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping, tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. I tracked them for months. Lost their trail in the mountains. Never found her. Never knew what happened to her. He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a bleakness that chilled Ayesha to the bone. Every child I see with dark hair, about her age. I look for her eyes in theirs. He looked directly at Ayesha then, and for the first time, she saw not just a protector, but a man drowning in a grief as vast as the wilderness outside. She was small, like you. And quiet sometimes. When she was scared, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with his pain, and with her dawning understanding. Slowly, Ayesha rose from the floor. She walked to the table and gently placed the calico doll in front of him. Then, her small hand reached out, tentatively, and touched his rough, calloused one where it lay clenched on the wood. It was the first time she had initiated any physical contact. Her touch was light as a feather, yet it seemed to anchor him. He looked down at her small, dark hand on his, and his own slowly relaxed, turning to gently cover hers for a fleeting moment. In that silent exchange, a bridge was built across the chasm of their separate sorrows. He was no longer just the man who had bought her, he was a fellow traveler in the land of loss. And she, the mute Navajo girl, had offered comfort without a single word, her perceptive soul recognizing the language of a broken heart. He had paid $1 not for a slave, but for a chance, however slim, to quiet the ghosts that haunted him, to do for one child what he could not do for his own. The fragile piece of their shared solitude was destined to be broken. Word traveled, as it always did in the sparse, interconnected world of the frontier, carried on the wind, whispered in saloons and trading posts. Silas Blackwood, nursing his bruised ego and the lingering suspicion that he'd been cheated of something more valuable than a mere $1, heard tales. Some said the old man, Josiah, was a miser with a hidden cache of gold. Others, more cruelly, whispered that the Indian girl was his slave in truth, or worse. Greed and malice were potent poisons, and Blackwood had a bellyful of both. He gathered 2 of his hard-bitten cronies, men whose loyalty was bought with liquor and the promise of easy plunder. One sun-scorched afternoon, as Josiah was repairing a section of fence line some distance from the cabin, and Ayesha was inside, mending a tear in one of her few garments with a needle and thread Josiah had silently provided, the distant sound of approaching horses reached her preternaturally sharp ears. Her head snapped up, the needle falling from her fingers. Terror, cold and familiar, gripped her. She scrambled to the small window, peering out through a crack in the shutter. 3 riders, dark silhouettes against the harsh glare of the sun, were making their way up the draw. She recognized the heavy bulk of the lead rider instantly. Blackwood. Her breath caught in her throat, a silent scream trapped within. Josiah was too far away to warn. He was out of sight, over a small rise. She was alone. The men reined in before the cabin, their horses snorting and stamping. Blackwood's voice, oily and confident, cut through the air. Josiah. Come on out, old man. We've come for a friendly visit. Silence from the cabin. Ayesha pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Don't be shy now. Blackwood chuckled, a humorless sound. Or maybe you want us to come in and fetch you. And your little brown pet. One of his men, a lanky fellow with cruel eyes, dismounted and swaggered towards the door, kicking it hard. Open up, Injun, he snarled. Ayesha squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of Josiah's face when he spoke of his lost Sarah. She thought of the carved bird, the gentle way he'd left food for her. A spark, tiny but fierce, ignited within her. She wouldn't let them take her. She wouldn't let them hurt him. Just as the man reached for the latch, the cabin door creaked open a few inches. He paused, a smirk on his face. But it wasn't Josiah who stood there. It was Ayesha. Small, defiant, her eyes blazing with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. In her hand, held awkwardly but firmly, was Josiah's heavy iron skillet, lifted from the hearth. Before the man could react, she swung it with all her might, connecting with his shins. He howled in pain and surprise, stumbling back. "Why, you little—" Blackwood roared, drawing his pistol. But at that precise moment, another sound split the air, the distinct, sharp crack of a rifle. Blackwood's hat flew from his head. All three men froze. Josiah stood on the rise, his rifle steady at his shoulder, his face grim, his eyes like chips of ice. "That's far enough, Blackwood," his voice rang out, clear and cold as a mountain stream. "Leave the girl. Leave my land." Now Blackwood, enraged but not stupid, saw the deadly intent in Josiah's stance. He hesitated, his face contorted with fury. "You'll pay for this, old man," he snarled. "That girl is mine." "She's under my protection," Josiah stated, his voice unwavering. "And you're trespassing." The standoff stretched for a tense moment, the only sound the wind whispering through the dry grass. Then, Josiah fired again, the bullet kicking up dust just inches from Blackwood's horse's hooves. The animal reared, and Blackwood fought to control it. His two men, seeing Josiah's deadly accuracy and the unwavering resolve in his eyes, began to edge their horses back. Blackwood, cursing, finally wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over," he yelled over his shoulder, but the threat lacked conviction. They rode off, faster than they came, leaving a trail of dust and thwarted malice. Josiah kept his rifle trained on them until they were out of sight. Only then did he lower it, his shoulders slumping slightly with the release of tension. He walked slowly towards the cabin. Ayesha was still standing in the doorway, the heavy skillet now lowered, her small body trembling. He stopped before her, his gaze gentle. He looked at the skillet, then at her face, her eyes wide but no longer filled with just terror. There was a spark of something else there, something fierce and resilient. A rare, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips. "You did good, child," he said softly. "You did real good." The dust settled, both literally and figuratively, in the days that followed the confrontation with Blackwood. An unspoken understanding deepened between Josiah and Ayesha. He had defended her, not as property, but as a person deserving of safety. She, in her own small, brave way, had stood her ground. Sheriff Brody rode out a few days later, his expression stern but his eyes holding a grudging respect when Josiah recounted the events, his narrative sparse but truthful. Brody had heard Blackwood's blustering, self-serving version in town and had already harbored his doubts. "He won't be back anytime soon, Josiah," Brody said, looking around the small, neat cabin, his gaze lingering on Ayesha, who watched them from the doorway, silent as ever, but with a newfound confidence in her posture. His kind preys on the weak, not on those who bite back. "You made your point." Brody then cleared his throat, a sound of officialdom. "About the girl, Josiah." "Legally." Blackwood's claim was flimsy as a rotten plank. "But she needs a future. More than just this cabin, maybe." Josiah nodded slowly, his gaze distant. He knew Brody was right. He was an old man, his own life a winding down trail. He could offer her safety for now, but not the world, not the community or the learning she deserved. He had given her a refuge, but he couldn't be her whole life. That evening, as the crickets began their nightly chorus, Josiah sat at the rough table, a lantern casting a warm glow on a piece of paper and a stub of pencil. He wrote slowly, laboriously, his big hands unused to such delicate work. Ayesha watched him, her head tilted, curious. When he was finished, he beckoned her over. He showed her the paper. It was a crude document, but the words were clear. He was leaving the cabin, the small plot of land, and all its meager contents to her. He had spoken to Sheriff Brody about making it official, about finding a decent woman in the nearest proper settlement, perhaps the widowed schoolteacher, who might take Ayesha in, not as a ward, but but as a student, a child to be nurtured, with the cabin as her own secure property, her inheritance. "This place," Josiah said, his voice softer than usual, tapping the paper. "It's yours now, Ayasha." He finally spoke her name, having learned it from her own soft humming of it one day, a sound so quiet he almost missed it. "You'll be safe here. And you'll learn." Brody will help. Her eyes, huge and dark, searched his. There was no fear in them now, only a profound, questioning sadness. She understood he was leaving. The next morning, he packed his few belongings into his saddlebags. He left the carved bird on the mantelpiece. He didn't say much. Words were always difficult for him. He just looked at her, a long, searching look, and then he touched the top of her head, a brief, almost shy gesture of farewell. He mounted his old mule, the same one that had carried him into Redemption Gulch what felt like a lifetime ago. He didn't look back as he rode away, the rising sun at his back, casting a long shadow before him. He had faced his ghosts, and though the ache for his lost Sarah would never truly leave him, he had found a measure of peace. He had saved one. Ayasha stood in the doorway of her cabin, watching him go until he was just a speck on the horizon. The vast wilderness surrounded her, but she was not afraid. She had a home. She had a future. She turned back inside, her small hand reaching out to touch the smooth wood of the carved bird. Then, a small sound, barely a whisper, escaped her lips. Not a word, but a note, a pure, clear hum, the first conscious sound she had made in longer than she could remember. It was the sound of a seed of hope, planted in the harshest soil, beginning, at last, to sprout. The sun climbed higher, bathing the small cabin in golden light, a silent promise of a new day, a new life, bought not with $1, but with courage, compassion, and the enduring power of redemption. What would you have done, faced with such injustice? How far would you go to protect the innocent?